When the head of the department mentioned the chances of Miss Roy being here at the college, all curiosity hell broke loose. This moment witnesses the effort of the man behind today's event, Dr. Rajesh James. Sir, kindly deliver the welcome address.
Hello everyone. A warm good morning. I welcome all of you to Shubhi Teresa Memorial Seminar. Shubhi Teresa was a member of the Faculty of English from 2011-2016. Although her association with the college as a faculty member spanned less than a decade, she left an indelible mark of professional excellence and dedication. This seminar is a tribute to the memory of the noble soul that left us physically in 2016. So without much delay, I welcome our principal, Dr. Jose John CMI, who has been a constant source of encouragement and support for hosting such an incredible space of intellectual exchange. Welcome, dear Father. Yes, it's a dream come true moment for me and for the department that Miss Arundhati Roy is among us today as a key resource person of the seminar. I can't believe it. This moment reminds me one of the lines in the gorgeous God of Small Things. It's a time when the unthinkable becomes the thinkable and the impossible really happens. Yes, for a humble department like ours, it literally means a lot. As students of literature, Miss Arundhati Roy and her writings are very dear to us, and I'm sure she doesn't need an introduction. Her prolific writing career ranges from the stupendous The God of Small Things to Asadi, Freedom, Fascism, and Fiction. And I wish for us she will read from her writings. Thank you, Ms. Arundhati, for accepting our humble invitation to be here in our college. Yes, with Rahel, I'm breathing deep this moment and bottling it up for posterity. A hearty welcome to you. Yes. Now I welcome Sri Venkitesh Ramakrishnan to this seminar. Venkitesh Ramakrishnan is a veteran journalist who has more than 40 years of experience in print, broadcast, and electronic media. He was a senior associate editor of Friendline. He is right now the managing editor of IDEM, a media collective based in Kochi and Delhi. We are really lucky that he is here. Welcome, dear sir, to this seminar. I should also thank Belbin sir. He has actually introduced me to Venkitesh sir. Belbin, thank you so much. So I would also like to welcome the family of Ms. Shubhi, Professor Sebastian sir and family. It is with this support that we could organize a seminar of this kind. Thank you so much and welcome all of you to this seminar. Finally, I would like to welcome all our invited guests, former faculty members, teachers and students from different colleges, dear participants, my colleagues and students to this session. Welcome all. With Anjum, I feel that this moment will pass in a heartbeat, but that doesn't matter. What matters is it's happening. Miss Arundhati Roy is going to speak to us. Yes. I wish you all a quintessential literary spell ahead. Once again, I welcome all of you to this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. A philosopher of nature and a man of letters, our father principal has been a facilitator of events like these. Dear Father, Reverend Dr. Jose John CMI, Principal, Sacred Heart College, kindly deliver the presidential address.
A warm namaskaram to one and all. It's a very great day for all of us. Not only because we are conducting a seminar in honor of Professor Shubhi Sebastian, but we are in an era where our existence is being questioned, not only by the current Modi question or BBC documentary or any other issues arising day by day in our daily lives. And we are happy that we have very, very eminent and apt person to interact with us today. That is why this auditorium is completely occupied in pin drop silence. And I can see the audience includes not only the students, but majority are eminent personalities like my own professors who taught me in this college English language and literature. Beloved father of Professor Shubi, Professor Philip Panyakaran, Professor Abraham, and so many eminent persons are here. That's a happy note for me. And let me place on record with a great feel of happiness and gratitude that Ms. Arundhati Roy is with us today, and also the presence of veteran journalist Venkitesh, to interact with the students on various topics of your choice. Usually a seminar is being conducted, there will be a keynote speaker presenting a paper on a relevant topic, and at the end there may be some discussions if time permits. But this is a different mode of seminar, I hope, that it includes the major part for dialogue and interaction with the participants and listeners. Today morning, I got a message from a WhatsApp group that being shared in the retired faculty members of SH. I am not retired, but I am being added into that by the admin of that group. And usually this group is having a serious discussion on various topics. Today's this posting was the story of a leopard chasing a dog to catch it and to eat. To save from the enemy, the dog somehow managed to get into a toilet through the window. And the dog was inside the toilet, sitting, and the picture is also posted. The leopard also managed to came down get into the bathroom. But something changed, or something happened. The dog was sitting on the side of the door without making any noise, completely surrendering. I am ready, you take me. But the leopard, feeling that it is being trapped, it forgot its hungry, why the animal was chasing the dog, and it was sitting on the other side of the room, the corner of the room, how to escape. So the animal scientists made an analysis of this scene, why the leopard did not attack the dog, even if it was very hungry. It was chasing the dog to catch it and to eat. And they say that when our freedom is being curtailed or at threat, the animals lose its emotions, lose their even the feeling of hungry. That is why the leopard did not attack the dog. And later on, the leopard was caught using a tranquilizing dart, and it was taken out. I think it is applicable to human beings also. Do we lose our emotions, our feelings, when our freedom is at threat? Another note which was shared by Reverend Father Austin yesterday even, that there was a news in the newspaper. He said, the news was earlier there, artificial intelligence is intruding into human creativity. And he was telling something about a portrait. So an artist took more than 10 or 20 years to create the portrait, but using artificial intelligence, it was recreated within seconds. And he was telling it was a threat to even human creativity in other realms also. A fine PhD thesis can be written, even the best plagiarism checking software cannot find any fault with that if you are using AI. It can create music which even the so-called Beethoven or any other maestro will not create or did not create. That's the potential of artificial intelligence. If it is so, why not the creative writing part of human intelligence here? If AI is going to be leading the literary world, it's a big threat. And I was just reading, searching something related to this topic, and it is said we have to say goodbye to conventional form of writing. It will be taken up by AI. But I am not for that. Can AI substitute our memories, our emotions, our feelings, which all on a sudden create new forms of pieces of literature, I believe. The memories which I have from my childhood days, my school days, my neighboring villages, it cannot be created by an artificial intelligence, whatever powerful it is. So my personal conviction is that AI cannot substitute a human mind and its creativity, because human mind and creativity is definitely, it is based on one's feelings, emotions, memories. Even before, I can reflect and recollect my memories maybe from my age of 2 or maybe hardly age of 1.5 years old. Before that I cannot. But there are memories, I believe, which are imprinted in us, which are always coming to our minds, even at least in sleep, during dreams. It will definitely reflect in our writings. And in that respect, we have a great writer, world-renowned writer, to share the experience of writing beautiful literature, to reflect and to ponder on, Ms. Arundhati Roy. And this is a blessing for all of us, Sacred Heart College, Tevara, and definitely the human community to have this great opportunity. And I take this opportunity to thank Professor Sebastian for being instrumental in constituting this Shupi Memorial Seminar every year, very wonderfully organized by Department of English. So I congratulate and thank each and every one of us who love Shupi and the literature and humanity. May Sacred Heart of Jesus bless us all. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father. Little events, ordinary things, smashed and reconstituted. Suddenly, they became the bleached bones of a story. Of all brilliant pieces of literature written, still many of us love heralding the name Arundhati Roy as the god of small things. We grew up reading the story of Esther, Rahel, and Amu and fell in love with the beauty of the nuanced world of little things. And I'm sure this is the one reason behind the large gathering of audience we have here from different regions. The great stories are the ones you have heard and want to hear again. The ones you can enter comfortable and are as familiar as the house we live in. That is their mystery and magic. She crafts such exquisite stories, conjuring worlds that are startlingly beautiful and spellbinding. We are intimately familiar with the dizygotic twins Rahel and Esther, Amo and Sophie Mole. We are also intimately familiar with Anjum from the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, who, as we all know, lives like a tree and also a mehfil, a gathering. Her prolific career as a writer of non-fiction from 2002's Algebra of Infinite Justice to books on capitalism, globalization, and democracy has brought her to the fore as a political philosopher. Being lovers of literature, we are so ecstatic to have you here, ma'am.
Venkitesh Ramakrishnan is a Delhi-based Chief of Bureau and Senior Associate Editor of Frontline English with 35 years of experience as a journalist in print, broadcast and electronic media. National politics, social justice, environment and public health have been steady interests throughout his career. His new venture, IDEM, a media fraternity consisting of seasoned veterans and dynamic young practitioners, is already garnering attention as a first trilingual news desk from Kerala. His illustrious past as a journalist in Frontline alone suffices to project his significance as an observer commentator of national and international importance. Such staunch personalities on the stage, dimmer audience, and an academic setup. What more can we ask for? Let's look forward to a thunderous ideas. We can move on to the talk. Ma'am, sir, please, yeah. Please note, questions from the audience would be encouraged only at the end of the session. Thank you.
Very happy to be here. Very honored to interact with Arundhati Roy, who's, of course, we have been acquainted for something like 2 decades, maybe more. But then, of course, in recent times, we have not had much occasion to interact, of course, but one keeps reading Arundhati all the time. So when Belbin told me that, that I have to do this, that Arundhati is coming to the college and I have to interact with her and talk to her on about various things, I must have taken about 10 seconds to say yes. That was the kind of, I didn't have to look at my appointment diary or anything. I just said, whatever it is, it all goes for a 6, I'm coming here. So but then after that, when I asked him how we should go about it, so he said, since it's a college, since the majority of students are literature students, I mean, I would like to know how many of you are postgraduate students and how many of you are undergrad? Only, okay. And what about, you have communication students also in this, apart from literature? Okay, right. So anyway, I mean, I just wanted to know because, it's something which I told Belbin also because, since they are all studying at various classes, the point is we need to keep the conversation in a format which is more universal in a sense,
Everybody understands everything, I know.
So anyway, I told Belbin, so he said, that he should try and concentrate more on Arundhati Roy's fiction, and but then it's a tough task to kind of, because Arundhati Roy's fiction is not the kind of fiction that you normally read, in the sense, it's not the fiction. It is not the fiction, in the sense, it's there have been studies on Arundhati Roy's fiction, that is 2 of her books, God of Small Things and The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, which have kind of classified it in terms of Marxian percepts, especially the kind of Marxian percepts that Althusser has kind of advanced, saying that these kind of reflect the ideological state apparatus, like in a manner that many of Indian literature works have not done. I mean, whether you look at the structures that kind of dominate the God of Small Things, and the structures, I mean, of course, when it comes to the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, it's kind of, panoramic. I think there is everything. There is Kashmir, there is Delhi, there is also people from my own ilk who have become too close to the establishment. I imagine that I know who it was modeled on. So anyway, the point is that it's not very easy to kind of divest politics from politics and ideology from Arundhati Roy's fiction also. Of course, the way she writes is also very unique and interesting. I remember reading after the Ministry of Utmost Happiness came out, I remember reading one of her interviews where she said the characters came to me and they would not leave, and then I had to somehow get them out. every Tilotama, Anjum, Naga, all these people started coming and living with me, and then so basically there is this intense literary experience that you feel with Arundhati, the work that she does, but then her non-fiction work, including Asadi, the latest work. I use this word from time to time, but I use it only where it is very apt. Non-fiction work, just like her fiction work, is phenomenal, all caps. So I'm sure that many of you must have read these books and got acquainted with it. We'll discuss this since we have had a brief reference to artificial intelligence in the introductory remarks of the principal. I think Arundhati also has dwelt on this subject in Asadi, in one of the early chapters in Asadi, where she I'll just read that out before I give the floor to Arundhati and ask her to do. I'll just read that portion where you talk about artificial intelligence, because it's very important and significant. Let me just find it. I think I can find it. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. Yeah, this is where, yeah. So it says, in what language does rain fall over tormented cities? That's the title of this article. I hadn't claimed to have written a masterpiece, but nevertheless I understood his anger towards me. This is about a writer, an interaction with a writer who asks her, first in Kolkata, he asks, can somebody write a masterpiece in a language that is not his or hers? Whether it's only somebody can write a masterpiece in one's mother tongue. So then Arundhati says, I hadn't claimed to have written a masterpiece, nor to be a he, but nevertheless I understood his anger towards me, a writer who lived in India, wrote in English, and who had attracted an absurd amount of attention. My answer to his question made him even angrier. Nabokov, I said, and he stormed out of the hall. The correct answer to that question today would of course be algorithms, not Nabokov. Artificial intelligence, we are told, can write masterpieces in any language and translate them into masterpieces in other languages. So that's a possibility that we all have to confront and think about in due course of time. But then, as I was saying in the preface, Arundhati's work, we need to see it in terms of the larger society. When she writes fiction, when she writes non-fiction, she is essentially engaging with the world in its myriad forms, whether it is society, whether it is people, whether it is literature, and of course lay society in all its manifold and beautiful manifestations. So Arundhati, I think we can go along by reading some select portions that you would want to read to these people, to the kids, and then I don't know whether you accept my expression, the kids. Most probably not, because this is my I think my avuncular patriarchy coming in. Apologies for that in advance. So anyway, I think I'll ask you to move forward. Yeah.
Okay, thanks everybody, and how lovely to see you all here. I think in this set of essays in Azadi, the book is actually called Azadi, Freedom, Fascism and Fiction. There's a lot of writing about what is literature, is only fiction literature, what is non-fiction, what is political, what is what Venkatesh calls fiction as opposed to fiction, you know. And to me, although people often talk about me as a writer who engages with the state and engages with politics, I actually think that even a fairy tale written by someone who thinks they're not political is a deeply political thing, because what is it that you prioritize, what is it that you edit out, what is it that you see, what is it that you unsee, all these are political things, you know. So politics is not something superficial about only state machinery or something. And as we know, the God of Small Things as well as the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, we live in a society, a caste-based society, a hierarchical society, where we barely need the state in order to enforce these hierarchies. You know, so whenever people ask me what my novels are about, I say everything, because how can you have a subject that seems such a narrow preoccupation for a writer? I thought I would start, you know, for me, I'm a better writer than I am a speaker. So I thought, let me read something to you from the ministry and from Azadi. And I'll read, I mean, given the storm that has been created by these two BBC films, I thought, you know, I should just read a part from this book that reminds us that, you know, when you try to make out that this is some imperialist British project, the fact is that those films are based on the work of Indian, very brave and wonderful Indian journalists, Indian activists, Indian lawyers, people who have documented things in a way that even if we don't expect any kind of justice in our lifetimes, as one of the beautiful poets said during the anti-CA protest, "Sab yaad rakha jayega." You know, we are not going to forget. "Sab yaad rakha jayega." So this part is. I think many of you are familiar with the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, but this part is really about Anjum, who's one of the main characters in it. She is born as Aftab in the city of Old Delhi. She's a Shia Muslim who calls herself a Hijra, and who these days would be called a trans person. But she has her own vocabulary for herself, and she lives in a place in Old Delhi called the Khwabgah, which means the house of dreams, with a whole lot of other people of other genders and other dreams, and they call the outside world, which we think of as the real world, they call the outside world dunya, you know, the real world, and they are in some other world. But so early on in the novel, Anjum, whose father Mulakat Ali has died, goes to Gujarat with a flower seller called Zakir Mian to visit the grave of Wali Dakhni, who actually is known as the father of Urdu poetry. And he was the first poet to collect a diwan in Urdu as opposed to Persian, you know. And so Zakir Mian and Anjum, they cement their plans to go to pay respects to at the shrine of Wali Dakhni by laughingly reciting a couplet by him, one of Mulakat Ali's favorites, "Jise ishq ka teer kari lage, use zindagi kyun na bhari lage," which means for one struck down by Cupid's bow, life becomes burdensome, isn't it so? And a few days later, they set off by train. They went first to Ajmer and then they go to Gujarat. On the third day, anxious about Zainab, Anjum called from the Ajmer railway station platform just before they boarded the Garib Nawab express to Ahmedabad. After that, there was no news either from her or from Zakir Mia. Her son called his mother's family home in Ahmedabad. The phone was dead. Though they had no news from Anjum, the news from Gujarat was horrible. A railway coach had been set on fire by what the newspapers first called miscreants. 60 Hindu pilgrims were burned alive. They were on their way home from a trip to Ayodhya, where they had carried ceremonial bricks to lay in the foundation of a grand Hindu temple they wanted to construct on the site where an old mosque once stood. The mosque, the Babri Masjid, had been brought down 10 years earlier by a screaming mob. A senior cabinet member who had watched as the screaming mob tore down the mosque said the burning of the train definitely looked like the work of Pakistani terrorists. The police arrested hundreds of Muslims, all auxiliary Pakistanis from their point of view, from the area around the railway station under the new terrorism law, and threw them into prison. The Chief Minister of Gujarat, a loyal member of the organization, was at the time up for re-election. He appeared on TV in a saffron kurta with a slash of vermilion on his forehead, and with cold, dead eyes ordered that the burnt bodies of the Hindu pilgrims be brought to Ahmedabad, the capital of the state, where they were to be put on display for the general public to pay their respects. A Weasley unofficial spokesperson announced unofficially that every action would be met with an equal and opposite reaction. He didn't acknowledge Newton, of course, because in the prevailing climate, the officially sanctioned position was that ancient Hindus had invented all science. The reaction, if indeed that is what it was neither equal nor opposite. The killing went on for weeks and was not confined to cities alone. The mobs were armed with swords and tridents and wore saffron headbands. They had cadastral lists of Muslim homes, businesses, and shops. They had stockpiles of gas cylinders, which seemed to explain the gas shortage of the previous few weeks. When the people who had been injured were taken to hospital, mobs attacked the hospitals. The police would not register murder cases. They said, quite reasonably, that they needed to see the corpses. The catch was that the police were often part of the mobs, and once the mobs had finished their business, the corpses no longer resembled corpses. Nobody disagreed when Saida, who loved Anjum, suggested that the soap operas on TV be switched off and the news be switched on and left on in case, by some small chance, they could pick up a clue about what might have happened to Anjum and Zakir Mia. When flushed, animated TV news reporters shouted out their pieces to camera from the refugee camps where tens of thousands of Gujarat's Muslims lived, in the Khwabga they switched off the sound and scanned the background, hoping to catch a glimpse of Anjum and Zakir Mia, lining up for food or blankets or huddled in a tent. They learned in passing that Wali Dakhani's shrine had been razed to the ground and a tarred road built over it, erasing every sign that it had ever existed. Neither the police, nor the mobs, nor the chief minister could do anything about the people who continued to leave flowers in the middle of the new tarred road where the shrine used to be. When the flowers were crushed to paste under the wheels of fast cars, new flowers would appear. And what can anybody do about the connection between flower paste and poetry? Saida called every journalist and NGO worker she knew and begged him to help her, but nobody came up with anything. And so then, anyway, finally they find Anjum and bring her back to the Khwabga, but Zakir Mia has been killed, old Zakir Mia, the flower seller. So Anjum stays in the Khwabga for a while, but what has happened has disturbed her so much that she cannot live her normal life anymore. She just can't act as if, nothing has happened. And so she just decides to leave the Khwabga and move into a local graveyard and live amongst the graves and amongst the graves of her parents. And, over the years, she builds a Jannat guest house in the graveyard, and that's much of the book is about that. So I'm just going to read a little bit about what happens to her when she moves into the graveyard. On her first night in the graveyard, after a quick reconnaissance, Anjum placed her Godrej cupboard and her few belongings near Mulakat Ali's grave and unrolled her carpet and bedding between Ahlam Baji and Begum Ranata Mumtaz Madam's grave. Not surprisingly, she didn't sleep. Not that anyone in the graveyard troubled her. No jinns arrived to make her acquaintance. No ghosts threatened a haunting. The smack addicts at the northern end of the graveyard, shadows just a deeper shade of night, huddled on knolls of hospital waste in a sea of old bandages and used syringes, and didn't seem to notice her at all. On the southern side, clots of homeless people sat around fires cooking their meager, smoky meals. Stray dogs in better health than humans sat at a polite distance, waiting politely for scraps. In that setting, Anjum would normally have been in some danger, but her desolation protected her. Unleashed at last from social protocol, it rose up around her in all its majesty. A fort with ramparts, turrets, hidden dungeons, and walls that hummed like an approaching mob. She rattled through its gilded chambers like a fugitive absconding from herself. She tried to dismiss the cortege of saffron men with saffron smiles who pursued her with infants impaled on their saffron tridents, but they would not be dismissed. She tried to shut the door on Zakir Mia, lying neatly folded in the middle of the street, like one of his crisp cash birds, because he used to make these little bird garlands, with 1 rupee notes. But he followed her, folded through the closed doors on his flying carpet. She tried to forget the way he had looked at her just before the light went out of his eyes, but he wouldn't let her. She tried to tell him that she had fought back bravely as they hauled her off his lifeless body, but she knew very well that she hadn't. She tried to unknow what they had done to all the others, how they had folded the men and unfolded the women, and how eventually they had pulled them apart, limb from limb, and set them on fire. But she knew very well that she knew. They who? Newton's army, deployed to deliver an equal and opposite reaction. 30,000 saffron parakeets with steel talons and bloodied beaks, all squawking together. Musalman ka ek hi stan, Kabristan ya Pakistan. Only one place for the Musalman, the graveyard of Pakistan. Anjum, feigning death, had lain sprawled over Zakir Mia's body. But the parakeets, even though they were or pretended to be pure vegetarian, this was the minimum qualification for conscription, tested the breeze with the fastidiousness and proficiency of bloodhounds. And of course they found her. 30,000 voices chimed together, mimicking Ustad Kulsumbi's Birbal. Kulsumbi is the guru of the Khwabga, and she has this little parakeet called Birbal who only speaks in galis and insults, Ai hai, Sali, Randi, Hijra, sister fucking whore Hijra, sister fucking Muslim whore Hijra. Another voice rose high and anxious. Another bird, Nahi yaar, mat maro, Hijron ko marna apshagun hota hai. Don't kill her, brother. Killing Hijras brings bad luck. Bad luck. Nothing scared those murderers more than the prospect of bad luck. After all, it was to ward off bad luck that the fingers gripping the slashing swords and flashing daggers were studded with lucky stones embedded in thick gold rings. It was to ward off bad luck that the wrists wielding iron rods that bludgeoned people to death were festooned with red puja threads lovingly tied by adoring mothers. Having taken all these precautions, what would be the point of willfully courting bad luck? So they stood over her and made her chant their slogans. Bharat Mata Ki Jai, Vande Mataram. She did, weeping, shaking, humiliated beyond her worst nightmare. Victory to Mother India, salute the mother. They left her alive, unkilled, unhurt, neither folded nor unfolded. She alone, so that they may be blessed with good fortune. Butcher's luck, that's all she was, and the longer she lived, the more good luck she brought them. She tried to unknow that little detail as she rattled through her private fort. But she failed. She knew very well that she knew very well that she knew very well. The chief minister with cold eyes and a vermilion forehead would go on to win the next election. Even after the poet prime minister's government fell at the center, he won election after election in Gujarat. Some people believed he ought to be held responsible for mass murder, but his voters called him Gujarat ka Lalla, Gujarat's beloved.
So, the slogan which reverberated through the CAA protests and became the anthem of the CAA protests, Hum Dekhenge. I don't know, just refer to it. All the more important, we read this passage to reiterate, Hum Dekhenge. We're all seeing this. We're all seeing this in the new context of the BBC documentary. We are once again going back to these memories. I mean, Anjum's life is a testimony of what happened at that point of time, and how she kind of feigned that she was dead, and even after they found out. But this is a thing that which has continued over the last 20 years. Arundhati took 20 years to write. There's a gap of 20 years to write the Ministry of Utmost Happiness from the God of Small Things. But in between, she had written a lot of articles and books on various aspects of Indian society. So now that we have come to this thing, and the slogan Hum Dekhenge is once again coming back to our lives. I, as a political journalist, there's something which, again, of course, Arundhati has referred to it in many of her writings, that it's not important to win. This writing is also a process of a struggle. It's part of the larger social, resistance that one is kind of trying to present to fascism. And it's not necessary to win all the fights. It's not necessary to win all these struggles. Vishwanath Pratap Singh, the former Prime Minister of India, once had told me, I had a very interesting interaction with him when he used to have this alternate day dialysis in Apollo Hospital. He used to have a dialysis every alternate day, otherwise he would not have survived for the last years of his life. But even in the midst of all that, when the Commonwealth Games was happening in Delhi and thousands of people who were living in the slums in the middle of the New Delhi city, they were taken away some 50-60 kilometers away and put in some wilderness. He was the only politician, once again coming back to these structures, the oppressive structures that occupy all positions of power in India across ideologies. You see that in the God of Small Things, you see that in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness even more starkly. So he was the only politician who took up their case, and then I had gone to meet him, and then it was clearly a losing case. There was no way that these people were going to be rehabilitated to where they were. So I asked him, why have you taken up this struggle? So he said, Venkatesh, हर लड़ाई जीतने के लिए नहीं लड़ जाता है. There are some struggles, not all struggles are done to win. There are some struggles which we need to do it for the sake of marking your protest, marking a fact, marking a signpost of the times. I think when we think about Hum Dekhenge and these passages of the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, I think that is the fundamental message that comes across to all of us. Can we go on to another question of it?
No, I think that one important thing is that we are now, at a stage where you don't feel it so much in Kerala, but those of us who live in Delhi, it's really like the air is running out of oxygen, and what is terrifying is that a Hindi poet once said, "Zehar kya karta hai khoon mein utarne ke baad?" What happens to poison once it has entered the bloodstream? How can you pull it back? How can you re-energize a river that has been poisoned? And we are there now, regardless of who the regime is, that continuous drip of poison from the mainstream media, which will one day, I hope, be remembered as an organ of a very unique form of fascism that is in our country today, and not just in the government but within the people. So in Delhi, one is constantly in fear. Because those of us who do not subscribe to that ideology then end up being friends, lovers, just gym mates or whatever it is with people who do not share that ideology. And then you happen to, in some way or the other, belong to some kind of a minority, and then you begin to fear. I have Muslim friends from Aligarh, from Kashmir, and you're just all the time worried, what will happen to you if you're driving at night, what will happen to you if you're on a train. Well, it's not even political, it's just personal, emotional, that kind of feeling, and that is where we live now. And in a democracy where political parties are trying to get back a footing, you see that they are frightened of talking about the communal question openly because they're frightened of losing the Hindu vote, So then what is left is us to speak about it always and say that it doesn't matter, you may win, lose, whatever it is, but this will be put down in history. We will remember that we were not with those people, So what are we as a society who has been able to absorb caste, uphold caste, dehumanize whole lots of people, say that there are castes who are bhudeva, like gods on earth? That is Nazism. That is fascism. I mean, we didn't need the BJP to come and tell us that, this is fascism or this. Caste is a form of fascism. Some people are entitled, some people are godly, some people are inhuman. So it's only a sideways shuffle to fascism. But every atrocity that we swallow, every atrocity that we allow ourselves to normalize, everything that happens to someone else, yes, it's going to happen to us. I remember writing in one of the essays, My Seditious Heart, that it is Kashmir, whether Kashmir is an integral part of India or not, India is becoming an integral part of Kashmir, because now we have our policed campuses, we have censorship, we have journalists being killed. I'm not comparing the horrors that are happening in Kashmir to India yet, but certainly once we allow that to be normal, surely it's going to happen to us, and we are not going to be able to speak about it at all, because we have accepted that it is all right for that to be done to other people in our name. So with that, I'm going to read a little bit from a chapter called The Untimely Death of Miss Jibin from Utmost Happiness. This is chapter 9. Ever since she was old enough to insist, she had insisted on being called Miss Jibin. It was the only name she would answer to. Everyone had to call her that. Her parents, her grandparents, the neighbors too. She was a precocious devotee of the Miss fetish that gripped the Kashmir Valley in the early years of the insurrection. All of a sudden, fashionable young ladies, especially in the towns, insisted on being addressed as Miss Momin, Miss Ghazala, Miss Farhana. It was only one of the many fetishes of the times. In those blood-dimmed years, for reasons nobody fully understood, people became what can only be described as fetish-prone. Other than the Miss fetish, there was a nurse fetish, a PT instructor fetish, and a roller skating fetish. So in addition to the checkposts, bunkers, weapons, grenades, landmines, Cassipirs, concertina wire, soldiers, insurgents, counterinsurgents, spies, special operatives, double agents, triple agents, and suitcases of cash from the agencies on both sides of the border, the valley was also awash with nurses, PT instructors, and roller skaters, and of course, misses. Among them, Miss Jibin, who didn't live long enough to become a nurse nor even a roller skater. In the Mazar-e-Shohada, the martyr's graveyard where she was first buried, the cast iron signboard that arched over the main gate said in 2 languages, "We gave our todays for your tomorrows." It's corroded now, the green paint faded, the delicate calligraphy flecked with pinholes of light. Still, there it is after all these years, silhouetted like a swatch of stiff lace against the sapphire sky and the snowy, saw-toothed mountains. There it still is. Miss Jibin was not a member of the committee that decided what should be written on the signboard, but she was in no position to argue with its decision. Also, Miss Jibin hadn't notched up very many todays to trade in for tomorrows, but then the algebra of infinite justice was never so rude. In this way, without being consulted on the matter, she became one of the movement's youngest martyrs. She was buried right next to her mother, Begum Arifa Yesvi. Mother and daughter died by the same bullet. It entered Miss Jibin's head through her left temple and came to rest in her mother's heart. In the last photograph of her, the bullet wound looked like a cheerful summer rose, arranged just above her left ear. A few petals had fallen on her coffin, the white shroud she was wrapped in before she was laid to rest. Miss Jibin and her mother were buried along with 15 others, taking the toll of their massacre to 17. At the time of their funeral, the Mazar-e-Shohada was still fairly new, but was already getting crowded. However, the Intizamiya committee, the organizing committee, had its ear to the ground from the very beginning of the insurrection and had a realistic idea of things to come. It planned the layout of the graves carefully, making ordered, efficient use of the available space. Everyone understood how important it was to bury martyrs' bodies in collective burial grounds and not leave them scattered in their thousands like bird feed up in the mountains or in the forests around the army camps and torture centers that had mushroomed across the valley. When the fighting began and the occupation tightened its grip, for ordinary people, the consolidation of their dead became in itself an act of resistance.
Arundhati was talking about the way mainstream media has shut up and started identifying with fascism in its various forms and manifestations. I think I would like to read a short portion of the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, where I think, where Arundhati shows a mirror to some of my ilk. and I think it will be of interest to students of communication here. I'll just read that. This sort of a friend Naga. I mean, Naga, I'm sure that many of you must have read Ministry of Utmost Happiness and been fascinated by the character of Tilottama, one of the most powerful characters in the novel. I mean, both Anjum and Tilottama. I mean. So this is an account from somebody who Arundhati has not really named that person. He of course comes as I, but then I think his name comes only. Yeah.
I is not Naga, I is Garson.
Yeah, that's what. I is, but he has got different names, na?
No, but they are two different people.
No, Naga. I know Naga and he are different people, but the narrator, the I,
Yeah.
he has got. At some point, you refer to him with a Bengali name also.
Yes. Biplab Das. There's not someone pointed out this to me that
I had noticed
nobody in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness doesn't go by several names, all of them.
Yeah, that's what it's. In fact, I think about the structure also. One of the first criticisms that we heard immediately after the book came out. Of course, I didn't agree to that at all. Was that that unlike God of Small Things, Ministry of Utmost Happiness is too cluttered in the sense, it's all over the place and it's not very structured and all that. Anyway, we'll talk about it later. I think it will be of interest. But let me read this portion. I think it should interest communication students and also anybody who follows journalism. This is about a journalist called Naga. By the time Tilo and he got married, Naga had already made the many transitions from an irreverent, iconoclastic student to an unemployable intellectual on the radical left, to being a passionate advocate of the Palestinian cause. His hero at the time was George Habash, and then on to mainstream journalism. This is something which I have seen happen to a lot of my friends and colleagues, and now recently my daughter, who is preparing for the civil services for some time, and she said that she has found a lot of young civil servants entrants becoming like this from a radical position of being fans of George Habash or Yasser Arafat to being bhaktas of who. Like many noisy extremists, he has moved through a whole spectrum of extreme political opinion. What has remained consistent is only the decibel level. Now Naga as a handler, though he may not see it quite that way in the Intelligence Bureau. With a senior position at his paper, he is a valuable asset for us, the narrator. The narrator is part of the Intelligence Bureau. His journey to the dark side, if that's what you want to call it, I wouldn't, began with the usual bit of quid pro quo. His beat was the Punjab. The insurgency had more or less been crushed by then, but Naga spent his time digging up old stories, providing ammunition to those farcical parodies called People's Tribunals, after which they brought out even more farcical People's Charge Sheets against the police and the paramilitary. An administration that was at war with the ruthless insurgency cannot be held to the same standards as one that is functioning in ordinary peaceful conditions. But who was to explain that to a crusading journalist who wrote his copy with the sound of applause permanently ringing in his ears? On one of his vacations from this brand of, rest of it is not important. So basically this is what, I think you will be reminded of a lot of anchors when you say that, but who was to explain that to a crusading journalist who wrote his copy with the sound of applause permanently ringing in his ears? Anandan is sitting here. I know that some clones of this are mixed in the Kerala journalistic milieu also. So I just thought, that I should bring this out. Okay.
It's like, of course, this chapter which you read out is a chapter where the landlord in whose apartment Tilottama lives, he speaks in the first person. So that is a sort of intelligence officer's assessment of how he's looking at an old college friend of his who, with whom he's always had a little bit of tension. And Garson Hobart is the name of a character he plays in a college play. And yes, and he somehow, he was in the book my intellectual other, and I was so as a writer, nothing like making a villain or making someone easy meat. You create a character who then begins to speak for himself and has a kind of sophistication which matches everything on the other side, which is a very unsettling experience to write, actually. But yeah, so those words are in the voice of Garson Hobart, who's an intelligence officer. Yes, I know. I mean, the structure of, in truth, the structure of the Ministry of Utmost Happiness is very carefully calibrated, including the chaos. It was like if the God of Small Things was a building or a house into which you looked through many windows. For me, Utmost Happiness was a city, and I think it's definitely a more difficult book to read, and I had no, illusions about that. And I think what is unsettling about the ministry for many people is that ultimately the God of Small Things, even if it's about a broken family, an unusual family, a shattered family, those are recognizable, mothers, fathers, grandmothers, uncles, and so on. Whereas the Ministry of Utmost Happiness questions entirely the idea of a family. So it starts out with a shattered heart, and then people bring shards of that shattered heart to create a mended heart in an old graveyard. And so the questioning, not just of the state or not just of societal practice like caste and gender and so on, but even of the idea of a family itself. I often say that if you look at the people who are buried in the graveyard, in Anjum's graveyard, essentially she has a guest house where there's a grave in every room. And if you look at who is buried there in the end, who says the prayers, what prayers are said, that in itself is a kind of revolution, Not a Inqilab Zindabad flag waving one, but even the refusal to accept death as something to be scared of, where you have even the wall between life and death is the most osmotic, and everybody is floating around, and so the piece on fascism I'll read to you is from an essay called "The Graveyard Talks Back."
I'll just ask one question.
Yeah.
How many years of actual writing did the Ministry of Utmost Happiness?
Venkatesh, I don't know what we even mean by actual writing, because I am...
You have said that you write all the time. In fact, I remember, that you have said this earlier, that when I walk, when I go to do something, all the time I'm writing. But then, as somebody who is also writes to make a living,
it's like I mean I'm not trying to be difficult, but it's honestly very difficult for me to say, because, for instance, both the God of Small Things and the ministry started out with this image. I am I'm an architect, I study design, and I'm a very visual person. So the God started with this image of the twins in the Plymouth with this pickle factory advertised on the roof, and then it just grew around that. That wasn't the starting image of the book, but that was how I started thinking about it. In the ministry, it began with something that actually happened when I was in Jantar Mantar, in those days when you could be at Jantar Mantar. Now it's been shut down. There's no protest allowed, really. So yes. So now, and I sometimes spend nights there, all of us, and suddenly this little baby appeared, an abandoned baby, and all the great people's movements and Marxists and Gandhians and everybody was just like, what, they didn't know what to do with the baby. Like, that wasn't part of their political thinking mandate, and I found that so fascinating, So it's like, for me, the ministry was, for example, you talked about, the idea of writing, just writing as remembrance, as resistance, as so on. We spoke about the poet who said, "Sab yaad rakha jayega." I remember once getting a book of it was called Bento's Notebook, and it was a book by a writer who I don't just admire as a writer, but I adored as a human being. Someone called John Berger, who died a few years ago, and John Berger sent me this book. And it happens to me often, very strange. I just opened it. As soon as I got it, I just opened it. And it said, "I'm thinking of you." He had written this "I'm thinking of you, Arundhati." And I asked you, why do you write what you write when you know that, in some ways you can't win? When you're writing these things, you know that you can't win. And then I know why you do it. You do it because you're telling them, we will never be zero. You can never make us zero. You can do what you like to us. You can lock us up, you can mock us, you can troll us. We will never be zero. So that's a part of, what one does. And that zero means we will write with joy, we will write with beauty. We won't just be these, quivering, angry people who are talking about literature and protest. No, we will continue to be us in our entirety, in our naughtiness, in our small rebellions, and all of that, So and for me, that only fiction can do. So when you ask how long does it take, it's like, I keep saying, I'm like a sedimentary rock, like you can't write this book unless I wrote the 20 years of nonfiction that I did, unless I traveled to Bastar, to Kashmir, unless I used to say that, the only royalties I want are that people in those places trust me and they talk to me because of what I've written before, Can I just go anywhere in the world and say, hey, I wrote this, can you give me lunch? That's my royalties, not, I get a lot. I do get, I'm embarrassed by how much of the other kind of royalties I get. It's a lot, but that's not as important to me as this. So I was talking about Anjum and being in the graveyard, and not accepting the borders between life and death. And in Kashmir, in Kashmir, it's like here you have a graveyard in Old Delhi covered by the Jannat guest house. Jannat in Urdu, of course, means paradise. And then you have the Valley of Kashmir, which people call paradise, covered with graveyards. And so the graveyard talks back is a lecture about the conversation between these graveyards, and the fact that in Kashmir they say the dead are alive and the living are only dead people pretending, because of what has been done. So anyway, in that lecture, I want to talk about a writer living in a time like this. One of today's most prominent faces in the protests against the Citizenship Amendment Bill is a young Dalit politician who heads the Bhim Army, named after Bhimrao Ambedkar. He calls himself Chandrasekhar Azad Ravan. He has chosen not just to honor, but to personify Ravan, Ram's vanquished demon foe. What does that signify? It's an audacious declaration that at least some people view the Hindu nationalist project as a form of colonialism and cruel subjugation. Ravan is seen frequently on the front pages of the papers, infuriating the government by making common cause with the Muslim community. He appeared late one night on the crowded streets of Delhi's Jama Masjid, a night filled with shouts of Jai Bhim, Inkilab Zindabad, long live Bhimrao Ambedkar, and long live the revolution. A precarious solidarity is evolving between Muslims and Ambedkarites and followers of other anti-caste leaders like Jyotiba and Savitribai Phule and Sant Ravidas and Birsa Munda, as well as a new generation of young leftists who, unlike the older generation, place caste alongside class at the center of their worldview. It's still brittle, still full of material and ideological contradictions, still full of suspicion and resentment, but it's the only hope we have. The trouble is that this fragile coalition is being slaughtered even as it's being born. The fake news project, its history department, as well as its current affairs desk, has been corporatized, Bollywoodized, televised, Twitterized, atomized, weaponized, WhatsAppized, and is disseminating its product at the speed of light. It's all around us. It's the weather we endure and the air we breathe. It's the smell of spring and the winter chill. It's what we see and hear and swim in. It's the threat, it's the promise, it's the grey pillar that presses down on our hearts in our dreams and our waking hours. It's what we react to and what we write against. And it's what makes writing that most perilous of activities, whose consequences are not literary prizes or good or bad reviews. For some of us, every sentence spoken or written, real or fake, every word, every punctuation mark can be torn from the body of a text, mangled and turned into a court notice, a police case, a mob attack, a television lynching by crazed news anchors, or, as in the case of the journalist Gauri Lankesh and so many less well-known others, an assassination. Gauri was shot dead outside her home in Bangalore in September 2017. And the last message she sent me was a photograph of her holding the Ministry of Utmost Happiness. Assassination is the extreme end of the spectrum. Elsewhere on it are threats, arrests, beatings, and if you're a woman, fake videos and character assassination. She's a whore, she's a drunk, neither of which do I personally consider an insult. And not to forget the all-time favorite, she should be gang raped. Attacks on people with a profile like me, whether they are wildly defamatory or true, or physical assaults on meetings and stages, or legal harassment with false cases, are usually appeals for the attention of the BJP High Command by political workers aspiring to a promotion, a kind of job application, because it is well known that those who show this kind of initiative are often rewarded. Lynchers are fated, those accused of murder become cabinet ministers. And in keeping with this spirit, days before the ministry was published, a reasonably well-known Bollywood actor, also a BJP member of parliament, suggested that the Indian army tie me to a jeep and use me as a human shield in Kashmir, as it had recently done with the Kashmiri civilian. Mainstream television channels spent hours debating the pros and cons of his proposal. You can imagine how this kind of thing plays out in the minds of aspiring job seekers. But we must remember to be kind, because the Indian economy being what it is, these are increasingly the only jobs that are available. All this is nothing compared to what millions of people of India are having to live through. I mention it only in order to think aloud about how this continuous, unceasing threat affects writers and their writing. Each one of us reacts differently, of course. Speaking for myself, as the pressure mounts and the windows are shut one by one, every cell of my writing brain seems to want to force them open again. Does that shrink or expand writers, sharpen or blunt them? Most people, I imagine, believe it would restrict a writer's range and imagination, steal away those moments of intimacy and contemplation without which a literary text does not amount to very much. I've often caught myself wondering, if I were incarcerated or driven underground, would it liberate my writing? Would what I write become simpler, more lyrical perhaps, and less negotiated? It's possible, but right now, as we struggle to keep the windows open, I believe our liberation lies in the negotiation. Hope lies in text that can accommodate and keep alive our intricacy, our complexity, our density against the onslaught of the terrifying, sweeping simplifications of fascism. As they barrel towards us, speeding down their straight, smooth highway, we greet them with our beehive, our maze. We keep our complicated world with all its seams exposed, alive in our writing. After 20 years of writing fiction and non-fiction that tracks the rise of Hindu nationalism, after years of reading about the rise and fall of European fascism, I have begun to wonder why fascism, although it's by no means the same everywhere, is so recognizable across histories and cultures. It's not just that the fascists are recognizable, the strong man, the ideological army, the squalid dreams of Aryan superiority, the dehumanization and ghettoization of the internal enemy, the massive and utterly ruthless propaganda machine, the false flag attacks and assassinations, the fawning businessmen and film stars, the attacks on universities, the fear of intellectuals, the specter of detention camps, and the hate-fueled zombie population that chants the Eastern equivalent of Heil, Heil, Heil. It's also the rest of us, the exhausted, quarreling opposition, the vain, nitpicking left, the equivocating liberals who spent years holding the road that has, years building the road that has led to the situation we found ourselves in, and are now behaving like shocked, righteous rabbits who never imagined that rabbits were an important ingredient of the rabbit stew that was always on the menu. And of course, the wolves who ignored the decent folks' counsel of moderation and sloped off into the wilderness to howl unceasingly, futilely, and if they were female, then shrilly and hysterically at the terrifying, misshapen moon. All of us are recognizable. So at the end of it all, is fascism a kind of feeling in the way anger, fear, and love are feelings that manifests itself in recognizable ways across cultures? Does a country fall into fascism the way a person falls in love, or more accurately, in hate? Has India fallen in hate? Because truly the most palpable feeling in the air is the barbaric hatred the current regime and its supporters show toward a section of the population. But equally palpably now is the love that has risen to oppose this. You can see it in people's eyes, hear it in protesters' songs and speech. It's the battle of those who know how to think against those who know how to hate. A battle of lovers against haters. It's an unequal battle because the love is on the street and vulnerable. The hate is on the street too, but is armed to the teeth and protected by all the machinery of the state.
Well, I think, one doesn't have to add anything to it. It is Arundhati's manifesto in the sense, of course, we'll have to get back to the moment where the child appeared among the protesters. That some paraphrasing of that, we'll come to that later. Now, of course, with this manifesto having been delivered to you in person, I think we can welcome your questions and comments. Please introduce yourself.
Good noon, ma'am. I'm waiting for this moment since I saw the brochure. I'm Raja Pravina. I'm all the way from Tamil Nadu, Madurai, to see you, ma'am. I can't believe myself. I'm still, I couldn't believe. Ma'am, I'm Raja Pravina. I'm doing my doctoral research on your non-fiction, ma'am. And I'm halfway through. And I have one question, ma'am, that can help my research. Ma'am, what does globalization really do to the world, ma'am? Does it really make the world whole into one entity as it literally means? Or does it fracture the world into fragments further, ma'am? If the both happen, which overlaps the other, ma'am? Could you please highlight, ma'am?
See, the fact is that globalization, the world can never be a single entity. It should never be a single entity, and it will never be a single entity. So when we talk about globalization, we only speak about it economically. We only speak about the globalization of capital, of the free flow of capital across national borders. And isn't it an irony that as the capital flows more freely, the borders get more and more militarized? You have 30 million refugees. The reason is that labor needs to be almost imprisoned while capital flows freely. Money can flow freely, but not people. And as you try and as this global capital tries to create markets, it wants people to want the same things, as in the same products, So in a way, that urge to have the same shops, you go to Lulu Mall, or you go to Delhi Mall, or you go to Saudi Arabia Mall, or you go to US Mall, and you get the same products, and the young people are required to desire the same things. That is all about global capitalism. But as that happens, people begin to, I think, get psychologically distressed about losing their identities, their language, and then you go into this kind of identitarian panic. So both things go side by side, and I have written many times about how in India in 1990 two locks were open. One was the lock to the Babri Masjid, and the other was the lock of the protected market. And those two locks unleashed two kinds of totalitarianism. One was economic totalitarianism, and the other was religious totalitarianism. And those two unleashed two kinds of violence. Both helped to militarize our country, and both waltzed together. So whether it's the BBC documentary or anything else, if you don't look at both things, you really don't get a radical understanding of what's going on. If you only want to look at communalism, but you don't want to look at the way capitalism has ripped apart the society, that has created the most unequal society in the world, and how the anger of those people who are being pushed off the economic battlefield in some ways, their rage is being used in ways. So you have to look at it as a whole.
So my name is Cyril. I'm so delighted to ask this question. So my question is from your magnum opus, that is God of Small Things. As you described it as an inextricable mix of experience and imagination. So writing is just like the childbirth experience of a mother. To deliver a poetry to piece of fiction is the same experience. But here, so my question is, so what are the stories a society that tells about itself? If you focus on the plot of the God of Small Things, that is Aymanam, so do you think your irresistible longing for literature might have fetched to the particular setting or not? So how would you look at this?
Well, I think, what I find quite interesting about the reception to the God of Small Things, once I was in the US, because a whole lot of schools of a lot of underprivileged children, actually, they in this whole district, they choose one book and they ask the children to read it, and then they come together to make projects, And so you had children, Chinese, African, all kinds of kids, and they had made such a incredible range of work on the God of Small Things, you know, the study of caste and class, and it was incredible to me. In Kerala, and especially closer to home in Aimanam, Kottayam, I find there's a fear of that book. You know, they want to celebrate me, the Booker Prize, famous and all that. They don't want to deal with what the book is really about. They'll say, oh, it's so charming, the language is so charming, it's about children and all that. But they don't want to address it's about caste, you know, and how can we just celebrate this person without actually understanding what the book is about, or addressing it. Initially, of course, as all of you know, even the Communist Party was very angry with the book because it does call out the left movement on not being able to understand what caste is and not wanting to understand what caste is, you know. So today that has changed. There is an understanding that you just can't get away with it by saying caste is class, comrade and all that. Doesn't work, you know. So you've got to look at it, and the Syrian Christians are worse than anybody else on the understanding of caste. They are, you know. Like sometimes I come here and I'm like, is there such a thing as Christian RSS? Because it feels like that to me, you know. How no, that is Christians who support the RSS. But in their own practice, you know, how little do you want to understand how unjust you are, how hierarchical you are, how entitled you are. You don't want to question any of your own comforts, but you know, you can feel in this state you're not under threat. But in the rest of India, there have been more than 300 attacks on Christians, but that is because the Christians, for the most part in North India, poor people, are people who converted to escape the horror of caste. So, you know, we are I mean, I'm sorry to sound like this, but in Kerala, we can tend to be a very smug society because we have not been threatened by this. And my book does question this, and therefore, you know, I get a lot of like, let's celebrate the prize and let's ignore the book, or let's just celebrate certain aspects of the book and not really look at what it is talking about. Silence.
Hello, ma'am. Here. I'm Firasat. I studied BA Economics in Sacred Hearts College. And I wanted to ask you this question that you are from Kerala and your mother tongue is Malayalam, and you write in English. So did that affect your conveying meaning? Like, you know, in local language you can convey meaning in a more authentic way. When you do that in English, certain meanings are not able to convey through English language or any other language other than the local language. And then I have the second question is that you studied architecture. So I feel like some writers, they prefer designing the novel and building it is designing the novel in their brains, and it is like a building. And some writers, they just pour it down and then edit it and carve it out like a statue from a stone. So what are your thoughts on that? And as a writer, and many other writers here who would like to know that if you know, they should like stick on to technicalities of writing or just write whatever that comes to their mind.
Thank you. Those are all wonderful questions. For the answer to your first question, I would ask you to read the first essay in this book, which is called "In What Language Does Rain Fall Over Tormented Cities?" So there are very many assumptions you make. For example, Madam, your mother is a Malayali, therefore your mother tongue is Malayalam, why don't you write in Malayalam? That my mother He's a Malayali who grew up in Delhi. My father's a Bengali. I was born in Shillong. The first language I learned was the language of the tea pickers, because it's all here in this book, because my parents were fighting and they used to farm me off to the tea pickers' quarters, because he was on the tea estate. Then I came to Tamil Nadu, from Tamil Nadu to Kerala, back to Tamil Nadu to study. My first husband was from Goa, my second was from Punjab. So I don't know what you want my mother tongue to be, but So, and then in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, and also when, at the time when people like myself were growing up, actually I can speak and read and write Malayalam, and it used to be the language of my friends and everything, and then we used to get punished. I had to write 1,000 times, I will speak in English, I will speak in English, I will speak, So that was a thing that happened to us in our generation. But I don't understand things like authenticity. What is authentic? It comes very close to then Hindustan is for Hindus and, all the rest of it. So you have to be very careful. After all, what every language, whether it's Hindi or Malayalam or every language has colonized some other language. There's been it's a very complex process of what has happened. Even Hindi itself, there's a whole part in this essay about Hindi and Urdu and how language was partitioned before the land was partitioned, and what are the influences that happen. So in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, for example, all the characters are continuously translating. Not I am translating, they are translating to each other. Anjum is translating to Saddam Hussein, Tilotama is translating to Musa, Garson Hobart is because everyone swims in a sea of imperfect language and translation. So when I wrote the Ministry, I used to joke to myself, should I say translated from the original by Arundhati Roy? Because it contains so many languages, So one works in this universe of languages in this country, and one understands the violence that each language has done to another. Also the liberation. I am... let me just read the opening para, actually, that'd be interesting, of the Ministry, of this, what is it called? In what language does rain fall over tormented cities? As at a book reading in Kolkata, about a week after my first novel, The God of Small Things, was published, a member of the audience stood up and asked in a tone that was distinctly hostile, has any writer ever written a masterpiece in an alien language, in a language other than his mother tongue? I hadn't claimed to have written a masterpiece, not to be a he, but nevertheless I understood his anger towards me, a writer who lived in India, wrote in English, and who had attracted an absurd amount of attention. My answer to his question made him even angrier. Nabokov, I said, and he stormed out of the hall. Then I'll skip the para on AI, which Venkitesh read. Only a few weeks after the mother tongue masterpiece incident, I was on a live radio show in London. The other guest was an English historian who, in reply to a question from the interviewer, composed a paean to British imperialism. Even you, he said, turning to me imperiously, the very fact that you write in English is a tribute to the British Empire. Not being used to radio shows at the time, I stayed quiet for a while, as a well-behaved, recently civilized savage should. But then I sort of lost it and said some extremely hurtful things. The historian was upset, and after the show told me that he had meant what he said as a compliment because he loved my book. I asked him if he also felt that jazz, the blues, and all African American writing and poetry were actually a tribute to slavery, and whether all of Latin American literature was a tribute to Spanish and Portuguese colonialism. But notwithstanding my anger on both occasions, my responses were defensive reactions, not adequate answers, because those incidents touched on a range of incendiary questions regarding colonialism, nationalism, authenticity, elitism, nativism, caste, and cultural identity, all jarring pressure points on the nervous system of any writer worth her salt. However, to deify language and freeze it in the way both these men has renders language speechless. When that happens, as it usually does in debates like these, what has actually been written ceases to matter. And that is what I found too hard to countenance. And yet I know and knew that language is that most private and yet most public of things. The challenges thrown at me were fair and square, and obviously, since I'm still talking about them, I'm still thinking about them. The night of that reading in Kolkata, city of my estranged father and of Kali, mother goddess, with a long red tongue and many arms, I fell to wondering what my mother tongue actually was. What was the politically correct, culturally apposite, and morally appropriate language in which I ought to think and write? It occurred to me that my mother was actually an alien, with fewer tongues than Kali perhaps, with fewer arms than Kali perhaps, but many more tongues. And English is certainly one of them. My English has been widened and deepened by the rhythms and cadences of my alien mother's other tongues. I say alien because there's not much that is organic about her. Her nation-shaped body was first violently assimilated and then violently dismembered by an imperial British quill. I also say alien because the violence unleashed in her name on those who do not wish to belong to her, Kashmiris for example, as well as on those who do, such as Indian Muslims and Dalits, make her an extremely unmotherly mother. And by the way, I'm all for unmotherly mothers, but... Oh, sorry, so he had asked a few other... You had asked some other question. Well, okay.
Basically, I think if you read the Ministry of Utmost Happiness carefully, this whole thing about being on the border, that is something which it's repeated in different contexts, like the Jannat guest house at the graveyard, Kashmir, and also these languages, people translating what they mean to the other person in terms of language. So it's all, we are all actually ultimately this whole argument about authenticity being one step shorter of even fascism. I mean, the claims about authenticity. I think it's something which gets that's not a very overtly stated, but it's a thread in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness. So I think this is something as youngsters, all of you need to kind of really look at this and imbibe this. I mean, just wanted to add that.
The second part of the question was about do I design novels? For me, the structure of a novel and the way a story unfolds is as important as the story itself and the language in which it's told. And to me, you got to pay attention to an equal amount of attention to all of this. So anybody who thinks that the Ministry of Utmost Happiness is not carefully structured, hasn't been able to understand the structure. But for sure, it's a complex structure, and as I said, I look at it more like a city that is designed, it undesigns itself, then it redesigns itself, and you can't understand it if you speed through the main highway of the city. You got to sit down, you got to get lost, you got to smoke a beedi with the cobblers, and you got to know people's names, you got to know where the secret places to eat are. Then you understand how this book is structured.
Hi, Ms. Roy. I'm Neeraj, and I'm a theatre practitioner. So my question is, so you told me that you design spaces, like you see God of Small Things as a building, and you see from each windows, and you see the other book as a city. So is it a conscious effort to create spaces, or it just happens organically as a story moves forward?
Well, you know, when I started writing, is it working? When I started writing The God of Small Things, I obviously had no idea what was going to happen. So I neither of the books did I start from the beginning and end at the end. You know, I don't do that. As I said, I saw this image in my head of this pair of twins in a sky blue Plymouth and selling, you know, achar on the roof. And I wrote that part of the book. Those of you who are familiar with where the thing is stopped, the car is stopped at the level crossing, and this big communist jatha is going past, and it looked like, I thought, gosh, is this crossing ever going to open, or am I going to just be this old lady who's like still stuck at the level crossing? And you know, and then I kept trying to think, what am I trying to do here? It's like I was listening to a song, but I just couldn't understand the rhythm of it. And then literally I took a envelope and I drew something like a structure, and I suddenly understood that, oh right, so there's this one thread that's going to be just over the period of a single day, and then there's these other threads that are going across the years, and that is the rhythm and the structure. Similarly, in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, it was like there was this baby that appeared on the pavement. There were these huge, these huge debates going on around it, and these crazy things that were happening, where these big social protest movements, they used to house a lot of nut jobs and crazy people. They're very generous in their, accommodation of people who fall out of, the mummy, daddy, baba, baby life that most people have. So I lived in that for a long time, and then Anjum was the person who knew what to do with that baby. And then, Anjum's graveyard, and it's like you have a little grain of sand, and then it starts to secrete, the layers and layers of the story. So I don't think that there's anything that I do which is either entirely designed or entirely instinctive. It's like even if you're an artist or if you're an actor, right, that you train until you hone your language, and then even when you're spontaneous, that spontaneity comes out of deep discipline and training. So there's nothing that's just ki, are maine socha to maine likh diya. It's not like that. I don't believe in writing as therapy and that, my story is so important to the whole world. It's not. It's the craft and the discipline and the understanding of literature and structure that is important. Everybody's story is important to the world, but how do you tell it? How do you put your story into the context of what's going on in the world? Because you, as an individual person who has nothing to do with the outside world, well, I have only that much time for that,
Hi, ma'am. I'm Deepthi Krishna. I'm doing my PhD in CUSAT. Actually, it's a very fascinating kind of thing for me because to see you as well. So the question is like, recently you said about negotiation. Negotiation is a sort of resolution to the problem of fascism per se. But do you really think that is it possible for negotiation, especially when it comes to the BBC documentary and all, when the questions are being asked, the way he responds, I mean, he is very who it meant, right? The way he responds, the arrogance, the rudeness, openness. That itself shows that closeness to the question. He's not even able to, he's not even ready to open up. So in such a situation, I would call him as a manifestation of fascism, I would say. So in that sense, is it possible for finding a resolution through negotiation is my first question. The second one is like, I was always interested by the character Veluta in God of Small Things. So though a leftist by heart and soul, I was also thinking about the same way. Why right now I could say that beyond the lines of class, caste has also become something very, very important. And people are actually recognizing, even from the left stream, I would say that in a way they are trying to recognize it. So if it was in this age, how do you would have structured Veluta if that is possible right now, by taking into consideration almost all the things that's happening around the left movement in Kerala and all? How would you manifest or give a face to Veluta? These are the two questions that I want to ask. Thank you, ma'am.
So I think you misunderstood the passage that I read about negotiation, because I'm not talking about negotiating with fascists. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how do you create a literature which negotiates with the reality, which isn't just a billboard, and which actually takes into account all these things and insists on presenting complexity, and insists on living in the world, not just saying I'm retreating, put me in jail, whatever, but insists on continuing to place the complexity of who we are as against the simplifications that fascism wants us. Those terms, Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan, which, by the way, are all Persian words, but never mind. So, that kind of thing. That was the negotiation, not talking about negotiating with the fascists, The second part, I think that, whenever The God of Small Things was written, the book itself is set in 1968. So rewriting it is not, that was a story of that time. You can't recast it because you're in 2023 now, But for example, the issue of caste is very much there in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, and that is a different story from Veluta's story. And the character Dayachand, who converts to Islam and is called himself Saddam Hussein, and who's living with Anjum in the Jannat guest house and running the funeral services, and who has this horse called Payal, who he uses to con people in various hospitals by selling them horseshoes. And that's a different look at how caste functions. But you can't. Whether the left movement is now engaging with caste or not is the problem of the left movement. The point is that caste has preceded that by millions of years,
One second. I just wanted to add to this, because I think, there's some kind of thinking that's happening within the left about the caste question, which is of course many decades late. But there is also this fact that, just like Arundhati said about journalists, how journalists kind of become part of the establishment, part of the system. They internalize the so-called structure and the value system. I think that Kerala's caste consciousness has not dramatically changed. I think it's still somewhere in the 1950s and 40s. It's still there, basically. In our households, I feel that the caste question and caste discrimination is still very much prevalent. This is my observation.
I don't know how many of you have read, but there's a little book I wrote called The Doctor and the Saint, which is about the debate between Gandhi and Ambedkar. And, one of the problems we have is that we are willing to accept and not question things that we should question, and while one is never at any point not seeing what a major contribution Gandhi made to the freedom struggle, you have to interrogate his views on gender, his views on caste, his views on the working class, his views on race when he was in South Africa. And unless we are, unless we understand what are look at the percentage of people who belong to Brahmin and Banya castes, and look in this country, very minute. But look at the control over the courts, over the bureaucracy, over the media, over the ownership of the media. We do live in a sort of apartheid society which is opaque to the outside world because it's not color coded, it's caste coded,
Ma'am, my name is Francis. I am studying English literature in Aquinas College, and I am very interested about your views about minority extremism. And my second question is, what is the role of Hindi language in the national integration of India?
So, my views on minority extremism are that when you create a situation in which you corner and make a whole minority feel helpless, there is going to be extremely unjustifiable extremism from that community, so one cannot look away from it. But the real problem today is that we are heading towards a majoritarian situation. Now when people like myself writing what I write, and then you suddenly see huge Muslim demonstrations after Nupur Sharma's statement against the Prophet, asking for people to be beheaded and jailed and so on. It's just unjustifiable, So minority extremism, and of course in other countries the minority is the majority, and we know what those forms of extremism are that are happening, So I don't have any, I'm not in a position where I have to justify or understand or appreciate that extremism either, One has to call out what one has to call out at all points. Hindi as a national language, well, if you look at the time from the late 19th century, whether it is Ghar Wapsi of converting Adivasi and Dalit people and bringing them into Hinduism, whether it's Hindi as a national language, and whether it's cow slaughter, all of these used to function from the same offices, So it's an old project, and it is a project that will never succeed in this country. So it keeps raising its head and then goes down again, But as I said, the cry of Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan are all ironically Persian words. That's how confused they are about themselves.
Hi, ma'am.
Please.
My name is Joanne. I'm from St. Joseph's College. What I wanted to ask you was not really a question, but let's just say I loved how your characters are all from broken pasts or even their present. So I loved, especially the last chapters of God of Small Things, how Ammu and Velita found their hope, and how Esther and Rahel found their hope. And I remember the words not so clearly, but what they shared that night was not pleasure, but a horrendous grief. So in this world, which is, in facing an impending doom, I think, where do you find your hope, and where do you think we must find hope as humanity?
Well, I think that, those of us who are capable of being dangerous, like myself, are are dangerous because we are broken people and we have nothing to lose but our effed upness, as I say. So, I feel like we are so, to remain safe is to remain boring, So I don't know why so many people accept that when they know and have seen for generations, especially women, where it leads, So what is there to worry about, like just be that person who takes a risk, who enjoys the understanding of liberation, of freedom, of not being molded by other people, and it's such a beautiful thing. So why not stand up and fight for what you want? It's not an unhappy fight. It's a beautiful fight. I mean, believe me, I fought it from the time I was a very young girl, and I recommend it. I recommend it. So it is true that I think once at some point I was somewhere in the Western world, and someone asked me this question about the God of Small Things, and said it's such a tragic and heartbreaking book, and when we see you don't look tragic or heartbroken. So I said, in Hindi we have a saying ki गाय के नीचे गाय नहीं लिखते हैं, meaning under a picture of a cow you don't have to write cow. Like, what do you mean by that? And I said, the point is that when you're an artist, when you're a writer, this happy childhood, happy marriage, happy motherhood, happy Children's Day, it's not worth your while. For me, the brokenness, the pain, the questioning of what is this place I live in, why are these people behaving like this, that is the substance of what I write. So in your own relationships, that is so utterly beautiful. The understanding of the pain, the scars, the past, when everything goes smoothly, that's okay for normal people, but it's not okay for artists, not okay for writers. I'm not saying everyone has to be pained, but even still, I think to understand, I wanted to see whether I could, you read that little bit about Tilotama, Rahel and Esther, and I was seeing if I would read you the similar thing about Musa and Tilotama. Wait. Yeah. So that's Musa and Tilotama. They had always fitted together like pieces of an unsolved and perhaps unsolvable puzzle. The smoke of her into the solidness of him, the solitariness of her into the gathering of him, the strangeness of her into the straightforwardness of him, the insouciance of her into the restraint of him, the quietness of her into the quietness of him. And then, of course, there were the other parts, the ones that wouldn't fit. What happened that night on the houseboat Shaheen was less lovemaking than lament. Their wounds were too old and too new, too different and perhaps too deep for healing. But for a fleeting moment, they were able to pool them like accumulated gambling debts and share the pain equally without naming the injuries or asking which was whose. For a fleeting moment, they were able to repudiate the world they lived in and call forth another one, just as real. A world in which the mad people gave orders and the soldiers needed eardrops so they could hear them clearly and carry them out correctly. So, yeah, it's always about borders and broken people. Those are the ones that interest me.
Hello, ma'am. Hello, sir. I'm Ambli Ravindran. I'm doing my master's in English language and literature. Actually, we have both your novels in our syllabus. And I wanted to ask you a very simple question. Since God of Small Things is a regional literature which takes place in Kottayam, I think that it hits different for the Malayali audience than with the other audience. This is a simple conclusion I came across while reading reviews in Goodreads and YouTube. So I wanted to ask you about if you had such an experience. And some of our teachers also asked us to read the Malayalam version of the novel too, since it gives us a different light to the novel. And also I wanted to ask you whether you could give me a personal autograph in my book, God of Small Things.
Well, yes, I can certainly give you an autograph. And I think the interesting thing, not just about the God of Small Things, but of any piece of music, a Beatles song, or something that grows to be loved, is that everybody who reads it or hears it thinks that it was written for them, And I remember being in Estonia and this woman saying to me, but how did you know about my childhood? Because this is about my childhood, this book, It's happened to, I remember even before the book was published, I was, in a big publishing house in New York where all the publishers had come to meet me. They like many publishers wanted the book, and so this was one of them. And one of them just drawled at me in this kind of Jewish American accent. Arundhati, we all got ants like baby Kochma. I was like, yeah, So it's like that's how that thing works. I mean, Poland, guys told me like Ministry of Utmost Happiness is about Poland. It's not about India. It's about Poland. So I think when something we love, we think it's about us. I mean, I have a more weird example of a man wrote me once a 10-page letter, an American guy, and he said that he knew that the God of Small Things was written by me entirely for him. Like it was just like this secret letter to him, And he says, at the end, he says, look, I've written this whole screenplay about it, and he's like, I just wanted to ask you, like, can you give me like Rahel's Love in Tokyo? And I also need that watch of hers. She has this little toy watch, Rahel, where the time is always 10 to 2. And so he says, I want that watch where it says it's 10 to 2. And then he's got a screenplay about, how someone will be like, hey, Mike, what's the time? And I'll say it's 10 to 2. And they say, but it can't be, man. It's dark outside. All this whole conversation. And the letter begins with, hello, Arundhati. My name is whatever, Mike something. I am I am a paranoid schizophrenic who has recently been diagnosed reality-based. But I know that your book was written for me. So I said, so I think the thing about art is that it enters you at that intimate space where it's a conversation between you and the work, not the writer, but the work, because the writer stops owning it at some point. The writer stops and should not be like some ego thing, because it's always a collaboration between the writer and some kind of magic, some kind of other thing. And when I say this, Marxists get angry because they don't believe in magic and other things, but I do. Yeah. Then I think we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi.
My, oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Can I go ahead? Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, ma'am. My name is Gracious. I'm an ex-student of SH. So I'm one of those perhaps foolish believers that ultimately good prevails over evil. And you talked about the rise of fascism in India. I'm wondering if you could look into your crystal ball and visualize its fall in our lifetimes. Thank you.
Look, I think that one thing that I keep telling people who lose heart is look at what other people have endured under Stalinism, under Hitler, under the Stasi. We should not allow those spaces to close down, because then we will have to endure all that. But the point is, for me, that I don't think we should look at it as if it's a match between good and evil and what will win and what will lose, because ultimately we have to look at that's what I write about for years and years and years. What is it in this society that has led to this? Because is it going to end if the BJP loses? It's not, So we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of lies we've told ourselves. We have a lot of intellectuals who lie to themselves and to us, who are deeply dishonest about what is justice, what is correct, what is inequality, what is going on. So we have work to do regardless. And if we start just thinking about it as some election that will end it, or some court judgment that will end it, forget it. That's not going to happen. We've got to start where we are, not that, somebody will defeat it. That's not going to happen, It's, as I said, zehar kya karta hai khoon mein utarne ke baad. The blood the poison has entered. Now we got to exercise it with our work too. Not Arundhati Roy will do it, or somebody will do it, or Bharat Jodo Yatra will do it. We got to all be out there. And Kerala, that way, is such a privileged place, because you still have space. You still have space to come out. It's like, I can't tell you how different it is here from rest of India. And so we have an extra responsibility. Instead of becoming Krisangis and all the rest of it, we have extra responsibility to understand what's going on responsibly. The Muslims in Kerala are not like the Muslims in UP and Bihar and other places, They are free, they're well off, they're entitled. They must also understand what's happening in those other places and respond with responsibility, as must the Christians, because Christians and Muslims are under attack in the north of India,
Any more youngsters? We finished. That is so rightly, Arundhati, we wait for somebody and we wait for the day. That is how exactly in India, the middle class and the educated elite are behind Modi. So everything's implicit there. I don't know whether you have noticed how even youngsters are scared to mention the name of the leader. So the fears, our psyche is all stuck with the fear. So fascism is here. I was thinking for a while, if you are continued with your exclusive literary careerism, you would have got more awards, more recognition, and financially also better rewarding. I appreciate you, and I have respect for you because you are so bold. I have gone through your book. It's a book, things that can be and cannot be said. Rather a conversation among you, John Cusack, Ellsberg, and Snowden. That gave me a lot of insight on political economy. Not only of India, even internationally. Many things that people do not know, which people should know, ought to know. Then really you can become more intellectually restless. And again, what I appreciate is your intelligence come through your heart. That touches me. Something you made some comments on NGOs and the literary festival there. NGOs, how the radicals became receivers of the largesse by corporates. And that is true. Ford, then SR, and in India, big corporates. How they change themselves, and sometimes they become travel agents, as you said. The secondly, you spoke about the literary festival, so-called. They are also sponsored by the same corporates. That's why you cannot take a decisive stand there. You become almost clients. I am so sorry about how it happened there. And again, you made a sarcastic comment. The tribes, how can they go on ahimsa when they do not have the arms?
No. I said when they were questioning what is happening in Bastar and said that they should be, Gandhian. So I said, how can they go on a hunger strike when they don't have food?
Yes,
and
exactly.
Non-violence is a political theater, but there's no one there to watch them.
Exactly. I'm coming to that point. Yeah, when they are hungry, when you have no food, how can you go on hunger strike? I mean, that is a remark. And to criticize Gandhiji seems to be a big plus for me. That's why the liberals here, they suddenly rose against you. They began criticizing it. He has to be criticized. So maybe you can make some comments. I mean, these are my...
Well, first of all, you congratulated me for, not pursuing a exclusive literary career, and I could have got more awards and more money. I have to tell you that I'm embarrassed by the amount of awards and the amount of money I have. Honestly, I try to use it in solidarity, but the fact is that, it isn't, I don't want to pretend like I've sacrificed something or whatever. I just write what I believe in, and it is extraordinary how many readers there are out there who want to read it, So I don't want to put forward some image of false suffering or martyrdom, because I haven't done that. I don't even believe in voluntary suffering. I don't believe it, because I'm not a Gandhian. But it is, the structures of how society works. What he was referring to is, essays and essays I've written on how, as the state pulled out of its responsibilities of health, of education, and all the things that states are meant to do, as it pulled back its spending, you had these corporates pushing out NGOs who work like in a fraction of the money to set up, to do some missionary work. They turn what should be people's right into aid. Then, all the best activists become paid employees. You have big literary festivals which are funded either by mining companies or by TV companies that are completely with this Hindu nationalist project. And you have people going there, they may even be saying radical things, but they say it in an atmosphere of so much noise that it doesn't matter, and it justifies all these people even more. So for me, it used to be terrible to know that the same people who are really forcing Adivasis in Bastar into living in the forests because the paramilitary are coming there every night, raiding their houses, raping women. And those same companies are, sponsoring the biggest writers in the world to fly in and to speak about free speech. And some of us have to stay out of it to to tell that story of what's going on, you know. It's not that everybody or every young writer can not go to a literary festival because they know that that's their platform. That's okay, but somebody has to be saying, yeah, but this is the scheme of things, this is the structure of what's going on.